Go ahead and mute everybody. Okay, good evening, everybody. I am Maestro Orlando Giovanni from Instructor. I think we've got a few people from multiple kingdoms. This is going to be a known world focused class. So we're not gonna go over a lot of kingdom specific elements today. So let me go ahead and go to my next slide. Okay, quick view of the agenda. It's the former Army soldier or Army officer in me. I have an agenda there. Okay, so what is this class not? It's not intended to help you get a background check. We're not going to teach you your kingdoms or the SCA's specific rules on youth combat. Plenty of classes out there for that. Your local marshalate should be teaching those classes all the time. It's not intended to teach you how to run a youth rapier tournament. We can make that another class, and there is actually a class out there already, I believe, on the virtual Rapier Academy. It's not intended to improve your mastery or understanding of thrust-oriented sword combat. I'm not going to wax philosophical over gaining your opponent's blade or when to guard in prima versus when to thrust in staccata. We're not going to get that deep. There are other classes for that, and I highly recommend that you, and I've given several of them, go hunt them down on the virtual Academy of the Rapier group. There's plenty of recordings of those kinds of classes, and we'll take questions at the end of class. And if you have a class that you'd like taught that you don't think is out there, let me know, and I'm more than willing to teach a follow-up class. So what is this class? It's intended to help you put together a program that helps kids find joy in rapier or thrust-oriented sword combat. It's intended to help you organize practices in a way that actually builds mastery. And it's intended to give you examples of ways to achieve the first two. So I'll be ending, or at the end of the class, we'll be going over an actual structure that I use in my youth rapier classes. I've been teaching youth rapier now for about 3 years locally. I've been fencing with the SCA for about 20 years, and I have trained. I was formerly in the Army for 27 years and was an observer, controller, coach. That's trainer for the civilians out there for the last 5 to 7 years of that time, and of course I've got lots of experience with that. So a lot of my techniques come from a broad range of experiences that I've had. So let me bring up my notes here too. Quick. There we go. Okay, so did not mean to do that. There we go. So I'm going to go over Orlando's maxims of youth training. These are, you can come up with your own maxims if you want, but this will give you an understanding of what it is that I try to do when I'm developing a training program and what drives my decisions about the program. I think these are good maxims, but feel free to come up with your own. Okay, this is not pillow fighting with swords. Kids have plenty of opportunities to blow off steam and play mindless games. Steel combat should not be one of them. Practices should be run like a class, not just open sparring with supervisions. Now, does that mean that you can't have fun? No, it doesn't mean you don't have fun. As a matter of fact, we have lots of fun in the classes that I teach. for Youth Rapier. I have lots of dad jokes on hand, and I take everything very lighthearted with the kids. But I don't view it as an opportunity for kids to just show up and blow off steam or to pillow fight. Our time is more valuable than that, and we owe the kids more than that. Now, does this mean that sometimes you're not going to have younger kids that just wander around or they're done after 20 minutes? No, it doesn't. In many cases, your younger students, they've got about 20 to 30 minutes in them, and you let them involve themselves in the class, and then when they're ready to take a break, you let them take a break, and you don't stress over it. Okay, reward skill development. Know what skills you want kids to work on, help them develop those skills, reward them when they show improvement in those skills. It's very tough to teach kids the skill of winning a fight. That's a complex skill, and most kids are not going to dedicate the amount of time they need to consistently win in tournaments. Also, it's going to be a lot more productive for your kids if you focus on skills that they need to develop. If you focus on them developing their guards, developing their footwork, developing their blade work, all the less complex skills that go into each of those, gaining your opponent's blade, parrying, beat parrying, learning the difference between Dewey Tempe and Stesso Tempo, those sorts of things. These are all things that almost every kid, no matter what their athletic capability is when they show up, can start to learn. The parts of the sword, those sorts of things, and then reward them for that. But don't make sparring the end game to the practice, or I try not to. Incorporate aha moments into training. Demystify the techniques by revealing how they too can execute a cool move. A good example of this is with the very newest fencers, showing them how they can very easily gain a blade in second or fourth guard, seconda or quarta, and then attack their opponent safely. You can use aha moments like how to remedy a parry with a disengage. There are lots of examples of actions and skills that you can teach that will give kids those aha moments. But you have to set up the aha moments for them so that they can see that by doing the skill, it will make them better at fencing as a whole. I like to let kids learn at their own pace. I'm not a big fan of sometimes at our practices, we'll have upwards of 16 kids. I'm not a big fan of calling one kid out who cannot lunge with their foot aimed just perfectly and spending 5 to 15 minutes working with that one student while everyone else is waiting. If you get to the point where you have that one student, you can either just let it go, especially if they're younger. I understand that perfect actions are important in training, but these are just kids. So in a lot of cases, you can just let it go. Some cases you can try breaking them off with a more advanced fencer. Have an assistant that you can break them off on, and I'll talk about some techniques that I use later on. But the most important thing is you don't want to make them feel singled out. help them work on it, and then find ways to that you can work with them, even if it's outside of class. I've had parents at some of the practices, hasn't been many, but one or two parents I can think of off the top of my head that would sit there with their kid and just harangue them over and over again about some action that they weren't performing just right. And you know, it's demoralizing, and it's not gonna make the kids want to come back. Remember, we want them to find joy in what they do. And that brings me to my last maxim, which is, you know, teach kids to derive joy in mastering a new art. We often say, well, you know, people, you know, sometimes look at my classes, which I have a pretty good number of kids show up to, opting to come to on a regular basis. And some people feel that they're maybe too regimented, or that I'm expecting too much out of the kids. But the thing is that, you know, kids can have fun mastering a skill. How many kids do you know that try to memorize commercials that they see on TV, or they try to memorize and perform perfectly that new dance that everybody's doing, or they try to perfect a video game or all the skills around that video game? Kids want to perfect these things, and you just need to set up the environment in which they can and give them the skills to do that. This goes back to not making it just pillow fighting. It's not just getting steam off. It's also them learning and deriving that joy from that art. Okay, so 5 elements of training. The reason I bring this up, this is not a full class this is not my 5 elements of training class. I do have that class. I haven't taught it virtually yet, so I think I'm going to plan on the next couple of weeks including a 5 elements of training virtual class as well. But this is I'm bringing this up because this is the foundation for the training program. We're not going to have an exhaustive review of this today, but just know that every skill that I have in my training program somehow supports one of these pillars of the 5 elements of training. Now, I divide all the skills up into various elements that they support. This table here is not considered exhaustive or infallible or complete. I often rethink some of the things that I've put here, or some of the ideas that I've got on here. I don't have too many very specific. Some places I have specific drills. Some places I have shorthand for things that just to remind myself what fits into these 5 elements or 5 categories. But basically, if you look at them, we've got the lizard brain, which is that reactionary part of your training, or that reactionary part of your fight. Then you've got your logical brain. This is the deliberate part of your brain during an engagement. This is the part that decides what the strategy is, that decides how you're going to control the fight. One thing we like to do, right? We like to hand off as much as possible from the logical brain to the lizard brain. This may differ from one student to the other. Some students, especially if they're naturals at martial arts, will be capable of handing off almost every skill that they learn to their lizard brain. Other students will spend their entire life overthinking every action that they perform, which is fine. But understand your student and understand what parts you can migrate from the logical brain to the lizard brain. Muscle memory or mechanics, right? Very important. Moving the sword from one guard to the next is a good example of that, right? Proper placement of your feet, proper footwork, all of those things are muscle memory that help you derive, or that help your body perform the skills that you want performed in the way that you want to perform them. And that you do that by training muscle memory. I often tell people, you're not born with a sword in your hand. Some people do seem like they were, but most people don't seem like they were born with a sword in their hand. You had to train your body and all the parts of your body to move with the sword and with your opponent. Athleticism. This is a big one I think that we forget often in the SCA. And it's often one of the components I think that differentiates to a great part the good fencers from the really great fencers. Is that a really great fencer is just a good fencer that has also improved their athleticism. This is your ability to improve your stamina and improve the amount of time that you can stay on the field, the speed at which you can move. All of those things go into athleticism. And then finally, integration. This is that mindful sparring that you do when you're sparring days. It's when you take all of these other 4 pillars and you put them together, and all of the skills that you've been training, and you work on them actively against an opponent that is also actively working against you. Okay, so at this point, what I'm going to do, is there any questions on the 5 elements of training? I don't want to get too deep into it, but I'm about 5 minutes ahead. So if there are any questions up to this point, feel free to raise your hand or speak up. And I'll also look in the chat as well. Okay, no questions. So let's move right along. Okay, developing skill levels. So I have a cheat sheet that helps me determine what each of my students should be working on. It's skill levels 1 through 5, and then I have a basic set of Italian rapier skills broken down into each of the skill levels. Not all of my students at practice know that this cheat sheet even exists. Some of them don't care. A lot of them do know it exists, and they follow it religiously, trying to develop their way up the chain through each skill. But more importantly to me is it just gives me an opportunity to break down the class. I can organize my beginner and advanced kids during practice. It helps me reduce confusion by enforcing a common vocabulary across practices. One practice I might call it, well, I want you to shoot in staccato, and then another practice, somebody comes along and use that upwards from the bottom shot that you do. And then another practice, they might call it, hey, why don't you do a rising shot? Great way to lose kids is to teach them 20 different words for the same action. So I try to keep a common vocabulary, and the skill cheat sheet helps me do that, especially in an organization like the SCA, where there are so many different styles converging. Gives kids something to achieve. The kids that look at the skills cheat sheet, they can start to check it off, and they can work their way up the skill levels. They can also know what skills they should be working on. Like, well, I think I'm ready to go to skill level 4, and then they can look at the skill level 3 breakdown and and decide, oh no, I don't have everything done in 3, I should work on this. They may even come to me and say, hey, would you mind doing a class on one of the skills and drills days on this? And then it also just lets the kids and parents know what they should be working on. I'm gonna take a look at the, I'm gonna bring up my cheat sheet real quick to show you guys, and I'll be posting all this stuff on the event afterwards. But I just want to give you guys a look at the cheat sheet that I use here. So this is my cheat sheet, and you can see I start with skill level 1 skills. I change this cheat sheet all the time. Sometimes I'll be up at night and I'll say to myself, man, this maybe I've got too many strikes here. I need to move some of these forward, or maybe I'm not teaching enough. I mean, I'm even thinking that right now because I've only got punta and punta reversi here. Why not teach staccato and imbricata and skill level 1? Why restrict the, I mean, it's only 2 more strikes, right? So, I'll change this a lot. You'll notice I've even got our SCA martial art skills on here: safe sparring, legal targets, armor requirements, shot calibration, blow calling, those sorts of things. This is very heavily influenced by 16th century Italian schools. So feel free to come up with your own skills cheat sheet. But like I said, more importantly, it just gives you a way to classify your kids at the classes so that you can determine who should be working on what. Okay. Oh, here we go. Trying to find my slides again. Now, I complement that skills cheat sheet with some visual aids. I'll put this out as well. Parts of the sword. I've got a footwork visual aid. The guards, basic Italian guards, 4 basic thrusts for them to work on, including, well, no, here it's the next one. Yeah, and then the four basic measures, but plus I've got some, I've got 2 of the ancillary measures over here that we work on, and voiding. Yeah, that's under construction. Then that's my cut and thrust stuff after that. We're not going to worry about that today. But I just want to give you an example of some of the job aids that I use when working with the kids to help me. Okay. Okay, now we get to the nitty-gritty, and that's the actual structure of my practice. So I'm gonna go over an example of what we do every month for our scheduled practices. Okay, so I've got it set up into 1 practice a week, and I imagine that there's 4 practices every month. Some months you're going to have 5 practices. I usually just let the kids decide what they want to work on at that 5th practice. So that's kind of a freebie. Some kids will prefer to come just on sparring days. Some kids may come on 1 skills and drills day and the melee day. Some kids hate melee and will never come to the melee day. There's all kinds of different students that like different things. Some kids refuse to miss a single practice. Okay, skills and drills. What are we talking about there? First of all, I always open with stretches. I want to discuss this, and because how I open it with stretches is I get all the kids to circle around me. I stand in the middle of the circle and I guide them through stretches that take about 10 minutes at the beginning of practice. We stretch our arms, our legs, do neck rotations, arm rotations. I can send out a list of the stretches. I don't want to go over all of them, but the stretches are important. But what else is important is that is the beginning of class. That gets them all together and gets them all on the same sheet of music. From that point forward, I'm never not in control of the kids as we move through the class, and we do hour-long classes. After we get the stretches, we do warm-ups. Most of the time, the warm-ups may start with a quick jog, about a minute or 2 minutes, just one circle to get everybody's heart rate up, and then we'll have all the kids line up, and then we'll work on footwork and guards and lunges and those sorts of things, almost like Rapier aerobics. I call out advance, retreat, advance, lunge, attack. I'll call off different guards. We'll also work on different exercises to help with kids' core muscles, to help them improve their ability to stay back weighted when they're on guard. So we do all kinds of things like that to get them warmed up. It sort of sets the stage for whatever the drills and classes that we're getting ready to have. And it also helps reinforce those most basic footwork and blade work skills with everybody. And it also gets the newer kids can watch and see what the more advanced kids are doing. Sometimes I'll line them up in such a way where the advanced kids are out front. Something good to do is to have an assistant that can go around and helping the stragglers that are having trouble. But more importantly, it gets everybody on the same sheet of music, and it helps reinforce all those most basic skills before you go into other skills and drills. Beforehand, I usually have drills and lessons planned based on how the kids are performing. So at this point, we may have different sets of drills either at the PEL. It's a good idea to have a couple of PELs if you can available. We may work on point control. We may work on voids. We may have some drills for working on gaining the line, very important skill. We may have a class where I've sometimes will invite other white scarves and MODs to come give classes, or just fencers that have a certain notoriety. If we've got a lot of kids in different skill groups, I may have some drills prepared for the more advanced kids that are above skill level 2, so to speak, and then more basic drills for the kids that are still skill level 1 and 2. In those instances, it's good to have an assistant. I'm fortunate I've got Don Elric and I switch off. He's the youth marshal for Wiesenfeuer. I'm the youth marshal for Namron. And so we switch off between which groups of kids we work with. And sometimes we'll have some of our students, our cadets and provosts come in to help us with the kids as well. So having those assistants are really important. And having things that the older kids can work on versus the younger kids, because they're gonna often have different weapons that they can work with. And then if we've got time left over at the end, I will sometimes just have some open sparring at the end and let them work on those skills that they're working on. And then we end I don't have that on here, but we end every practice, or I end every practice with a big ice chest full of icy pops. So I think the kids actually come for the icy pops, not for the Rapier. And then so all the kids circle around, and I usually pick one of the kids to distribute icy pops, and then we talk about how everybody's doing, and it gives them a chance to, on skills and drills days, we really don't talk too much serious at the end. You know, it just gives the kids a chance to catch up with each other and fellowship a little bit. Okay, facilitated sparring. I call it facilitated sparring because it really should be facilitated. Once again, I'm not a big fan of just plain old open sparring for the kids. We always open with stretches and the warm-ups as well. Sometimes depending on how much we've got to go over for that day, we may do more or less warm-ups. We'll probably warm up and stretch a little bit longer on sparring days. We do full armor inspection and calibrations at the beginning of every facilitated sparring, because we want to make sure that that habit gets becomes habitual for the kids to perform armor inspections and to perform a shot calibration beforehand. We identify the kids that have not sparred before. Inevitably, on sparring days, you've got kids that have never sparred before. You've also got kids that this is their first time showing up, and we will split them off and work with them separately if we've got assistance. If we don't have assistance, sometimes we may just have them stand on the sidelines, and they can spectate and cheer the other kids on. We always actively marshal and call the blows that the kids don't call. This is something we don't do on the adult side, and I'm a full supporter of that, but we do have the opportunity with the kids to reinforce another good habit, which is calling your blows. And so by actively marshaling, we don't let any of our kids become so-called rhino hiders. We give active feedback during sparring, and this is part of the facilitation. So I prefer to give the feedback between matches. That's a personal preference. I don't like stopping a match or distracting one of the combatants during a match in order to give them feedback. I would rather observe and then give the feedback afterwards. But we do actively give feedback during the entire practice. And it should be based on the skills that kid's working on, or the skills that the whole class has been working on at the previous skills and drills. I try not to focus on too many things all at once. I look for kids that are being too aggressive, and everybody should be doing this, and calling them out. Too often I've seen practices, both in armored combat, or Balfour as people call it, and in Rapier, where they tend to just let it go. They're not calling anything, we'll just let it go, or they're being a little too aggressive. Or no, we want to call that out. We want to develop good habits, and being too aggressive on the field is not a good habit, and it's not good skill either. And even if they continue to be too aggressive, they're just going to become a mediocre fencer anyway. They should really learn how to use an artful form. Sometimes I'll pair less advanced kids against adults in sparring. Sometimes I'll even have a couple of adults spar. I call this showing the kids what right looks like. Have a couple of adults spar. They can watch the adults. Pair some of the less advanced kids with adults. Too often what will happen is if you pair an advanced kid with a less advanced kid, the advanced kid is just going to annihilate the newer kid over and over again, and they won't get any training value out of their practice. So by pairing less advanced kids with with adult fencers that are youth authorized, or well, in this case, you could, as long as you've got a youth authorizing marshal there, then you can allow them to derive some benefit from the training. And then at the end of the practice, have them all gather together. This is when the icy pops go out. Another super secret technique for keeping the kids online and tracking with everybody. But then I like to have each of the kids tell one thing that they think they could improve and one thing they think they did well. But I don't harangue the kids over it. Go to each kid. If they don't have anything right away, okay, we'll come back to you, or you don't have to. If you couldn't think of anything, that's fine. If you saw something you want to elicit out of them, I will sometimes say, well, hey, do you think you could work on this? And then move on to the next kid. No reason to end the practice with too much dissonance. And then melee day, that's on week 4. Once again, stretches, warm-ups for everyone. Full armor inspection and calibration. Many of the same techniques from sparring apply here, but we also address the additional safety concerns of melee. No running, or no running and attacking at the same time. If you're moving quickly, the sword goes up in the air. When you go to engage, you stop, find your posta, and then engage your opponent. We reinforce that before every melee practice. It seems extraneous, but this is how kids learn. Try to even the teams up, but one thing I like to do is I like to keep the teams the same throughout the practice. You'll often see melee practices where they constantly switch the teams up. The problem I have with that is that people grow and learn over time. But if you're constantly changing the teams up throughout the practice, that team is not going to grow and learn, because that team won't be the same every time. It would be just like if you were on the field trying to learn single sword, and every match they put a different sword in your hand, or they put something different in your hand. You can use the same thing over and over again to try and practice. Remember, this is practice. Keep the kids together on the same teams throughout the practice, and watch that team improve, because that's what you're not rewarding them for winning. You're rewarding them for improving their skill from the beginning of practice to the end of practice. Did they start out the practice assigning special teams and special roles to different members of the team, or not? If they didn't, then did they end the practice assigning them? Those are the kinds of things you want to look for in melee practices. I often have adults serve in the commander roles first. A lot of times I'll open the practice up with an adult on each team on each side. The great thing about doing that is if the adult is the commander, they can show the kids what the commander should be doing first. And then on the next melee, when you start putting kids in charge, they can emulate what the adult did. Now, I often switch commanders though. So usually throughout a practice, each of the older or higher skill level kids will have a chance to command. I don't put kids on the spot that aren't ready for it. So if they don't seem like they're ready to command, then I don't push the issue with them. Sometimes I'll ask them if they really don't want to do it. I'm like, okay, you don't have to. And then at the end of each melee, if we have 3 melees or 4 melees during a practice, at the end of each of the melees, we'll gather the kids together, and I ask 2 questions of the commanders. That's, you know, what was their plan, and then what actually happened. You know, once again, if they're having trouble answering the questions, maybe one of the other kids on their team can answer it, or you know, just move on and you know, get back to it later. Okay, so a couple more techniques that I've already gone over. Having assistants. On guard is it's a great way to get kids' attention. I start every kid off very early in the practice learning that when they hear me say on guard, they go to on guard. Same thing, if they hear me say line up, they all line up. I teach them that when they hear that, they're going to pay attention. So once you have a few kids in the practice and they're paying attention, it's really not that difficult, because as you get newer kids show up and you call on guard, they'll see that all the other kids go to on guard and they start paying attention. So a lot of times I'll say on guard, and then everybody will line up, they'll go on guard, and then I'll say, okay, relax, and I'll start the class. Using older or more advanced kids to help train the younger kids is not a bad idea, but it is sometimes a bad idea. When it is a bad idea is when you do it too much. The older and more advanced kids are still kids that are learning. We don't want to take away all of their time for practice to help work with younger kids or less experienced kids. I'll invite outside instructors occasionally to come give a class. I bring Pels to class that we can line the kids up on to work on different skills. Sometimes we'll have visual aids and videos. The Segno aids that I went over earlier with the footwork and all of that. I've got large versions of those that I'll use sometimes for the classes that I can put up on a wall. Sometimes I'll get the parents involved. I always like to see if the parents want to join the kids for the drills. But sometimes that can be a bad thing too. I've had parents approach me that were not happy with other parents being involved. You might have, I don't know if it was jealousy or, but it was basically, she said that, you know, well, I can't do all of this, and, you know, I don't think it's right that some so-and-so's mother is out there working with them, you know. I don't know I don't know what it was, but be prepared. There could be some drama when you get the parents involved. I like to start and end with ceremonial activities. The stretches are a ceremony. I call it a ceremony because they happen every time. The icy pops and circle up and talk at the end is also a ceremony. You can call it whatever you want. I just call it a ceremony because it's something we do every single time. The important thing is that you have a structure to it so that you move from one thing to the next. You'll find you'll have a couple of kids that when you forget to do one of those things that happens every time, like even if I forget a certain stretch, I have some kids that will remind me, hey, Orlando, you forgot to do the stretch where you put your hand between your shoulder blades. And I'll be like, oh, cool, well, thank you. Let's go ahead and we'll knock that out real quick. So it keeps the kids engaged in the practice by having ceremonial milestones throughout the entire structure. And then don't forget to have fun. And I like to have lots of dad jokes and lots of funny things that I do, and joke around with the kids. We've got this one stretch, for instance, where you're stretching your back down, you know, you're bowing your back and looking up to the sky, and I tell her all the kids to howl at the moon, and you know, all the little kids howl at the moon, and a couple of the older kids, and then there's a few teenagers there that get red-faced and embarrassed because they don't want to howl at the moon, but all the other kids are. So it's a lot of fun. So you know, keep it a lot of fun. Have, you know, and know when the kids, when you've lost them, so that you can move on to the next thing. So look at that. I am under time, and now I've got enough time for questions. Pretty good. So, so what questions do we have? Feel free to raise your hand. It's on the participants deal. There should be a raise hand option. If not, just
raise my hand.
There we go. Yeah.
So this has been great. Thank you. This is super well organized, full of great information. The question I have is, it sounds like your classes are very big as far as the kids go.
Not always. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't.
Well, so we've got one fencer that comes, but he's going to be out of the youth program in a year or two. I'm here because I'm looking at getting my kids into it. I've been teaching them stuff at home, but they're going to be 8 and 6. So right at the range when I can start bringing both of them.
Okay.
It's very likely they're going to be the only 2 kids at this practice. And trying to teach your own kids anything is a mess.
Oh yeah.
So I'm wondering what advice you have for small classes, or very small classes.
Okay, I'm gonna give a longer answer on this than I probably should. So we struggled with this for a long time, where we would have onesie twosies showing up. Now, one of the things I identified that we were having a problem with was that we would have adult practice at 7, and we would also start youth practice at 7 as well. And so it was very common that we were trying to split our instructors for the youth between their time that they wanted to spend at adult practice. So the first thing we did was we split off our youth practice. It starts at 6 now. And also starting it earlier is a lot better for most kids. So we have our youth practice starts at 6, and our adult practice starts at 7 o'clock. So that means that we can now, when I'm there, I'm dedicated. I'm not worried, you know, do I need to go over and give a class with the adults, or do I need to train up for Queen's Champion or anything like that? My time is completely dedicated to the kids. And I noticed after we did that, moved the times around, we started bringing in a lot more kids, because we had me and a couple other people that were fully focused on it, and we really pushed Youth Rapier to get a lot of people to bring their kids out. So that's one thing we did. Now for the smaller practices, if that's all you can get is one kid to show up. I mean, if you do everything under the sun and you can only get one kid to show up, then you need to treat that like, hey, they're lucky they get to spend their entire hour with one-on-one training. And you train them one-on-one for an hour. But once again, you can't do that, or you're less likely, I should say, to do that if you're holding the youth practice at the same time as adult practice.
So we've been splitting it off, not quite this way. We've just been separating the practice. And it's basically been with the one kid. It's been one-on-one youth happening simultaneously. And occasionally, since this kid is older, swapping out one-on-one trainers every once in a while just to keep them occupied.
Yeah, I would look at having it at a separate time, especially what time is your adult practice start right now?
7.
Yeah, I'll bet you if you started at 6 with youth, you would get a lot more kids. 6 or even 6:30, and maybe have a half-hour overlap. But our numbers went way up after we did that.
What's
And
way?
not just because, not just because of the time, but also because of the continuity and the consistency of training.
So I'm just curious, how big are your classes sometimes? What's your range?
We have 16 sometimes. Sometimes we have 8. Sometimes we have 3. Sometimes we have 2. It's it's a huge range. It's not, and it's not out of lack of interest. We've had a lot of kids that come for backyard and weekend practices. We build them into a lot of the regional practices. It's just the nature of kids and parents' schedules and that sort of thing. We have a lot of kids that show up for a little while and they disappear, and then they'll get replaced with other kids that show up for a while and disappear.
What's your age range? How many of the younger kids you have? I'm asking because that's where my kids are at, and that's what I'm thinking about.
We've got about trying to think of an average class. We'll have usually a couple of kids, 2 or 3 that are in that 6 to 8 to 10 range, and then we've got we usually have 1 or 2 in the 10 to 13 range, and then maybe 4 regular teenagers, and then usually we'll get those top 2 groups are usually the ones that fluctuate the most. Although our most regular kids are the teenagers, though, as far as the kids that show up primarily. But we've got a couple of families that have like 5 kids in the family. So that's one of the reasons we have such large numbers that show up. That's also a reason we have such a broad distribution, because you can't have 5 kids at once. So, well, I guess you can, but I couldn't even imagine that. But yeah, so there's an even distribution across all of them as well.
Cool.
So we're lucky in that respect also, for having so many large families. Okay, well, was there anything else for anybody else have any questions? No. Did I answer your question okay, Albion?
Yeah, I mean, I think as good as it can be, right? I mean, I've been teaching my kids fencing for, I don't know, a year and a half. You could call it teaching when they're 4, right? That's mostly trying to avoid hitting daddy in the nuts.
So how old are your kids?
They're going to be, by the time practice starts back up again, hopefully, they should be 6 and 8.
6 and 8, yeah. So with the younger kids, especially the 6-year-olds, we had one 6-year-old and then he was 7, that was so serious about it. He was more serious than most of the teenagers, but most of the kids in that age range are really, I wouldn't have huge expectations. It's really more about getting a sword in their hand, having them perform pseudo footwork, making sure that they keep their tip on their opponent, some very basic elements of it. It's a good chance to break them of over reliance on beat parries, for instance, that sort of thing. But other than that, I don't start having huge expectations out of kids until they're about 10. And then 10-year-olds, then we start looking at higher expectations, so to speak.
Right. Well, these guys right now, they're doing footwork. They've got their parries down. I've started them doing, calling their attacks and parries against each other. That's as far as sparring has gone.
Yeah.
Any more past that, and somebody's going to the hospital.
If it at all helps, I'm parents of twin 6-year-old boys, and we have the same struggles and doing the exact same basic fundamentals as the focus without a lot of expectations and just building the joy. So
yeah, and like we play games like we'll do follow the leader, which is where we have them line up and one is the leader and one is the follower, and the follower is just trying to keep their mezzo on their opponent's mezzo, and they lead them around. And a lot of times we'll do this with an adult and a younger kid, and just have them see if they can follow you around using good footwork. Sometimes we'll do follow the leader fight, which is where they do follow the leader, and then when somebody says fight, they're now engaged, and it makes that switch for them. So there's some things like that we do. Touch of death, that no swords. They're just trying to touch their opponent's mask. So there's lots of things that you can do like that.
I get about a half an hour before they're out.
Yeah. Oh yeah. At that age, they're not gonna stick around too much. Like I said, you just want to get them comfortable with the mechanics right now, and then as they get more excited about it, they can they're not starting from the foundational stuff. So okay, well, good questions. No other questions from anybody at all? Okay, well, hey everybody, I really appreciate you guys joining us tonight. I hope everybody got something out of the class. I will post all of my materials on the event or links to them, and then feel free to share the materials. Feel free to modify the materials for your own use wherever you want to. I'm not, if you want to give me attribution, that would be great. If not, I'm not that worried about it. Most of my work is derivative anyway, because it's all based on 16th century fencing. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a great night.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Orlando.